The time is now 11:25, so we'll be beginning with our third talk of the session. So the speaker is An Le, and we'll be speaking on a reclassification of 6 Vietnamese tense aspect mood markers as discourse particles of sequentiality. So please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is An, and today I'll be talking about 6 Vietnamese tense aspect mood markers. I reclassify them as discourse particles of sequentialities. I'm sorry that I can't be as enthusiastic as Henry here because I'm still a little bit jet lagged. So I was supposed to be here yesterday, but my flight got cancelled. I just landed this morning, so apologize for that. All right, but before I start, I just want to acknowledge that the University of Adelaide, which sponsors my PhD study, chapters of which I'm presenting to you today, stems from that, and also for British University, which I'm currently working at, who sponsors financially for this trip, and also for the sales organizers and the sales team. All right, so let's start with an example. So for example, I have sentence ăn đã ăn cơm rồi. Okay, so it basically means he has eaten already, and the functions of the particles that you can see in bold here. Typically, we would think that it's a markers of the past tense and also the perfective aspects, because functionally it is the only way that we can sort of assign functions to these particles. Okay, now I have a little modifications of this sentence. So for example, I add the adverbials chưa 5 giờ mà anh đã ăn cơm rồi, meaning that it hasn't been 5 o'clock yet, but he has started or he has had dinner already. Or đã 5 giờ rồi mà anh chưa ăn cơm. So it has been or it has passed 5 o'clock already, but he hasn't had lunch yet. Okay, so by expanding these sort of units of analysis from a single isolated clause to some sort of more adverbial or bi-clausal sentence, the meanings of that or the meanings of chưa is sort of the aspectual meaning is sort of expanded, so that the perfective and the past tense and aspects is not clear anymore. So here the beginning or the actions of having dinner, so the beginning or the inchoactive aspects of it, so it's not actually perfective anymore. So it's he has started or he has already had dinner. Okay, so if you expand the unit of analysis, so the aspectual meanings of these particles sort of become more ambiguous in that sense. Okay. So in the literature previously, all of these 12 markers are what we typically call a pre-verbal tense aspects and mood markers in Vietnamese. But what I'm trying to argue is that these 6 out of the 12 are fundamentally different than the already existing or 10 aspects and mood markers in the Vietnamese language. And here I will be presenting 5 arguments to support this central arguments that the 6 Vietnamese markers đã sẽ sắp mới rồi chưa are fundamentally different. They are discourse particles rather than being lumped together as a pre-verbal 10 aspects and mood markers. And I'll present 5 supporting arguments to support these central arguments and then call for reanalysis. Okay, so the 5 arguments that I'm presenting is first about the inflection-oriented and event-centric tendency of 10 aspects in mood series, which I think is not suitable for the 6 particular markers as a support framework for the 6 particular markers. The second argument is the covert over complexities that operates the 6 markers versus the time markers, and these complexity are largely underexplored in the literature. And the third argument is the etymology, which argues that these 6 time markers have clear etymology, but the 6th discourse marker doesn't have that, do not have that sort of clear etymology. The fourth argument is the behavioral similarities of the 6 markers to the other discourse marker cross-linguistically. And then the fifth argument is the distinct syntactic positions of the 6 markers versus the time marker. Okay, and then in the next part, I'll sort of just explain why we analyze them. Surely they can be both discourse markers and time markers. Why the need for reanalysis? Okay, and then we have some time for Q&A. All right, so a close analogy is that the phenomenon is sort of like an elephant, and I'll try to approach it from 5 different angles, even though we have 6 angles. All right, so the first argument is that time theories, 10 aspects of mood theories, are inflection-oriented and event-centric. So they work fine for the time markers in Vietnamese, but for the 6 particular markers, they are not that suitable for French. Okay, so I'll first define what does time theories contain or consist of. Okay, so here I'm talking about canonical words, so major words that offer tense formalism, and also from a more analytical approach. And then aspect theories, which include grammatical aspect, lexical aspects, or accent arts, and then telicity aspect or predicational aspects. And mood include the expansion or the overlap between mood and modality, which, if you can see here, these are some of the main papers that talk about this. So what is common in tense aspects in mood theories is that these 3 parameters. Okay? First, there has to be some sort of conceptualizations of the partition of time, whether it's past, non-past, future, non-future, or past, present features. So these are evidence in all of these tense formalisms. Okay? And once you have a conceptualization of the position of the arrow of time, then you then have a didactic sentence, which is so in the Ragnartakian terms, you can call it the time of the event, time of speech, or the reference time. And then the third parameter is that you then anchor each of the didactic sentences to the arrow of time. So that is what common in tense aspects in mood theories. And so from those canonical works, we do have some sort of general definitions of 10 aspects in mood in linguistics, which is tense, a location of the event on the arrow of time, aspect and internal temporal structure of an event, and in mood, which is the speaker's perspective towards an event. Now, these works perfectly fine for these 6 markers, which are time markers, but I'm arguing that they doesn't work for these 6 particular markers, which are reclassified as discourse particles, because they focus on an event. So what sort of functional contributions of these different aspects of meaning that these particles contribute to an event? But what if we have a unit that's larger than an event? What if we have a biclausal sentence? Or what if we have multiple sentences? So what sort of function does it particles add meaning or contribute to? So the 10 aspects in mood interpretation, I argue that it's very event-centric. It's focused on an event. And then that's what's usually what you have currently in the literature, that these 6 are usually lumped together with the other 6 to form a 12 pre-verbal 10 aspects in mood practice. So here I have no rules whatsoever that that is a markers of past, 10, and perfective aspect, or in the traditional grammar you would call them the perfect in the traditional grammar sense. But the more serious question I want to ask is that the dysfunctions of that reflects its fundamental usage, natural fundamental usage in the Vietnamese language. For example, by expanding the units of analysis, you can already see that the aspectual meanings of that changes, or it doesn't have this sort of past perspective function anymore. And what it already has is some sort of anterior, something happened, then this happened. Okay, so the perspective is not already there. So what it will keep expanding the unit of analysis. So what sort of functions are each of these six particles like? Okay, then I'm proposing that they are actually discourse particles, so they are function as sort of like event sequencer or sort of like a sequentiality marker. So here, whatever concern 10 aspects in mood can be is suitable for the previous markers, but not for these six. So for these six, I think the interpretation that reflect the fundamental usage is that there exists a time adverbials or an event, and then followed by the other event. So here the question is, or the framework is a before and after relationship is temporal as it is spatial. So before and after is before and after of each other. There exists this time adverbial or this event, then transition to the other event. I think that these are the fundamental uses of these particles. Now, let's say that you're not convinced that 10 aspects, those are still 10 aspects in mood particle, and then you're not convinced that those are discourse particles. So the second argument that I'm arguing is that these 6 discourse particles are optional, whereas the 10 aspects in mood markers are compulsory in speech. Now, you can see that these are the interpretation, but in a single clause sentence only, yeah? So here, each of these are admissible in speech, and all of these are compulsory in speech. Now, what I mean by compulsory is that when the context is clear, okay, the omission of these 10 aspects in mood markers is volitional, and it does affect the meaning interpretation. For example, if you have an Dan term drawing, which is he was or he is eating already, and then you remove the 10 aspects in mood particles, it changes the meaning, and this removal is volitional. So this is compared to a volitional omission, which is you have the tall man versus the man. So you volition or intentionally choose to omit the adjective tall. Okay? Whereas for omissible or covert complexity, when the context is clear, you can omit these markers. And the omission is non-volitional, and it does not affect meaning interpretation. Okay, so here and that the road, and then if you remove the that, the meaning interpretation is still the same. So technically in the literature, compulsory or is referred to as overt complexity. So this is the question that, for example, why is the ending in verbal ending in English is compulsory in the sentence when you have the adverbial yesterday, when yesterday is economically sufficient. So that is well studied in the literature, but for covert complexity or for this kind of omissible framework, why that omissible in that sentence where the overt present of revoir or yesterday is semantically and economically sufficient? Now this complexity is not well studied at all. And we don't know what sort of ideas or what sort of things that led to or operates these covert complexities. So for example, here you can have argument-based omissions, like if you have in Spanish, hablo español versus yo hablo español, you can omit yo. Now, I'm not arguing that the omission of yo will have some sort of more pragmatic or emphatic focus or remove that. But when the context is clear, you can omit them, and the reason you can omit them is because of the old agreement in the verbal. Now, this is contradictory to non-argument based omission. Here, the omission of that doesn't have any sort of agreement, verbal, morphological verbal agreement. So it's just omitted when the context is clear. So you resort back to the word context as something that conditions the covert or overt presence of these 6 discourse particles. And those are completely, entirely different from the 10 aspects and markers. Okay, so these are argument, yes, works fine. So these are compulsory by any means. But what operates these omissions or omissibility is not well studied in the literature of covert complexity. So the third argument is etymology. So the 6 discourse particles have no etymological connection to Chinese, whereas the 6 obligatory 10 aspects and mood markers are all Chinese borrowings, and more importantly, they conform to the same patterns of grammaticalization in Chinese. So here, etymology unknown, which would refer a lot of cognate traces and things like that. Here, etymology is really clear that Chinese borrowings, especially borrowings of verb, an auxiliary or adverb, and then the grammaticalization pattern is clear and conform to others patterns. So from auxiliary to main verb and vice versa. So let's have a look at the example of the 6 10 aspects and markers. So these are the etymologies that they share. So you can see that they are, the meanings are quite sort of similar, and they are all sort of borrowings of early Chinese or sometimes Middle Chinese, but of verbs or auxiliaries or adjectives. So these are main sort of parts of speech. These, the last one, the etymology is quite murky, but it's nice to put the name on the face. So I read a few papers from you, which talk about the etymologies of I. Okay, so you can see that these 6 markers have really clear etymologies, and here they have the ability to become the main verb as well, which is a common pattern of grammaticalization. For these, not so much. So what we find is that the characters that represent them are purely for representing the sound. So the Latinized script that has these characters, they have no meaning whatsoever. They're just there to represent the sounds. So these have no clear etymology. They're definitely not Chinese borrowings, but they need to be some sort of more intense cognate chasing kind of processes to find their origin. Okay? And none of them can become main verbs. So they are really different from the general grammaticalization patterns. Now, a fourth argument is that these behave similarly to other DT, other discourse particle cross-linguistically. And also what I think is Andre's presentation should be sort of classified into discourse particle, all of the demonstratives. So the literature in discourse particles is very, very complex, but discourse here is used in opposite to the term event-centric. So they're not focusing on event, they're focusing on discourse, and particles are different from enclatics or morphologies and so on. Okay, so here in German you have Modalpartikel. So these are sort of words that you add to the sentence to show a natural speech and it adds flavors to the sentence. But then you can omit them. So that's sort of what I think operates here. Okay, skipping through the fifth argument, which is these, I think, have distinct syntactic position. So here you can see that these are the preverb to and the postverb to, And I think that the tense aspects in mood markers of these two positions are distinct because they are immediately next to the verb. Here, some of them can occur post-verbally and pre-verbally as well. And I can talk more about it, but let's talk about some disclaimer and some why I'm doing a reanalysis. So first of all, I'm not arguing that 10 aspects of mood do not apply to Vietnamese. There's few markers. And then the question is, can they both be discourse particles and time markers at the same time? Yes, they can. So why on earth bother doing a reanalysis? Is multifunctionality obvious? So what I'm thinking is that it's shifting the focus in the literature from a pre-verbal lumped together big groups of pre-verbal 10 aspects and mood markers. They are fundamentally different because they reflect the natural reflection of their function in Vietnamese, I think is different. Okay, and they can further the discussion of covert urban complexity, and also it has some sort of clinical implications because I'm looking at clinical adaptations of tests for children and for adults who have aphasia, and then these are still the same markers that are expected as the compulsory morphological markers in the language, whereas the use of them are completely optional. Thank you for listening. I know it's a lot.